Right, so welcome to the session on entitlement. So what we want to do is go into breakout rooms and have a chat. Introduce yourselves, have a chat. What do you understand is entitlement? What does it mean to be entitled? And then if you've got time, have a chat about what are you really entitled to? What are you really entitled to? So we've got 6, I'll put you in 5. Simon's telling me I've got Lucille's name up here, which is just typical of me. I always like to travel with someone else's name. I'm going to put you in chat rooms. There we are. Some are 3. Generally, it's about 3 people. Cool. So off you go. Go and have a chat about what is entitlement. What are you actually entitled to? I'm going to give you, normally we give you 20 minutes. So you up for that? 15, 20, 15, 20, which one? 15 wins. Okay, see you in 15 minutes. I'll pop in and out. If you want more time, we can give you some. Righty ho, off you go. Bye. Hey, Steph.
Hi. Sorry, I came in late, so I don't know what we're in a room for 15 minutes for.
Steph, go and talk about what you understand entitlement is. What is entitlement? And how much are you really entitled to in your life? What are you entitled to?
Oof. Wow.
Yeah. Off you go. See you later.
Okay, I haven't been sent to a room.
No, I'm thinking where I'm sending you. Do you want to meet Americans? Do you want to meet locals?
Wow. I'd be curious to meet with Americans, actually.
Okay, I think they're actually quite widespread. So I'm sending you off to, oh, maybe you'll like Miriam. I'm sending you to a mixed bag.
Okay.
With a very lovely, yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you later.
You thought you could just leave, Julia, but
I did, but you followed me. And I was going to do something dodgy, trying to clean the screen with my shirt, which might have meant I would have exposed myself. So I'm glad I actually restrained myself. So, welcome back. How was that? Did you find some strangers to befriend? Yeah, what did you find out? Who wants to rock and roll?
I could go for it. Oh, there's Nicola. No, look.
Yeah, whoever.
Go for it, I will speak after you.
Okay. So I was in a group with Todd, Jonathan, and Sim Lindele. And we got whiplashed just as we were getting to the juicy bits. So we really needed like 10 minutes more, really. Honestly, Julia, we needed 10 minutes more. That's okay. And we're an interesting mix, South African, American, white males, black woman, black male. So we kind of had a nice mix of humans in there. And there's something Jonathan said, which I had to write down because it blew my mind. And he said, the ultimate entitlement is not even having to think about it. And I was like, damn, that's like, that's true, right? Then the whole context, the whole system is so set up that you never have to doubt it will happen for you or it may not. But then we got into an interesting discussion around you know, is it kind of you have it or you don't have it, or is it more along a continuum, entitlement, which kind of Sim and I were reflecting on how, or at first I was reflecting on how, you know, as a Black woman, I know I don't know entitlement. You know, that was like my initial kind of lens on it, that, you know, it's something that I've seen, but it's not something that I feel I am in the middle of the circle when it comes to. But when you look at it as a continuum, it then brings another lens which says, how does my ability, my education, my ability to speak English in a particular way give me entitlement versus someone who speaks Xhosa only? And it's not all an intelligence thing, it's just what in our system, you know, is considered more or better. So that kind of speaks about this continuum of it, and then what entitlements does that then give you? That kind of, although you may not be at the top of the ladder, but you're very aware that you're not, there's someone behind you on this entitlement scale. And then we were just getting, when we got whiplashed, we were just triggering this idea of, is entitlement also context-based? So there's the entitlement that white men experience in the world versus, say, Black women. But then there's also the entitlement in, say, a Black African home, you know,
Recording in progress.
That the male may experience versus the woman in that home, or the male child may experience versus the girl child in that home. So yeah, just exploring how context plays out with entitlement.
Lovely. I mean, it just shows how big and complex this discussion could go. You know, if it's on a continuum, is it going to be like, you know, like Biko said, Black people can't be racist because there's a fundamental power inequality that excludes them. Does that work the same way in the context of entitlement? Is it a yes or a no? Is it a continuum? And is it context-based? Brilliant ideas. Love them. Who wants to chime in on top of that? Thanks, Chachambo. Nicola.
So I'll pick up on the context line, because I think that was a lot of our conversation. And just as we were talking about the word entitlement and this idea of title, and linking into that thing of, well, if you've got a title, if you're a king or a duke or a queen, there's certain things that are due to you that nobody even questions. And kind of historically, when did this idea of entitlement creep in? It was sort of the shift from, well, obviously this is the way things are. If you've got a title, you get privileges, and if you don't, you don't. And it's kind of this idea of more of an egalitarian society, and then entitlement being quite provocatively, negatively charged, either very cringy if it's pointed out in me, or sort of get a bit on your high horse when you see it in others for whatever reason, because it flies in the face of this changing, like, historical context around who gets special privileges and who doesn't, and who's due them without any question. Yeah, I mean, where we got to in our conversation was, what's the difference between entitlement and your rights? Do you have any rights? Are you due to anything? I mean, from a basic needs point of view, from a basic human interaction point of view. Yeah, it was also, could have done with more time. It was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea. Like, what really is due to you? And is it that stuff enshrined in the Constitution, or is there other stuff? Fascinating discussion. Thank you. Who's up next for some commentary? Yeah, Miriam. Hi. Or Simon, either or.
Go, Miriam.
Thank you. When you were saying that, and we started the breakout room, the first thing that came up was the war in Ukraine. And it was like Putin's entitlement of just stepping in and taking and not caring. So if I looked at that, it's about a someone rather than a something that just takes what they want. And that's like the ultimate in how we could look at entitlement.
Yeah, that you take without giving, or that
That's
you
right.
don't feel you have to give, or that you might not even notice you taking.
Or if you need to kill, you kill for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter in which way you do it. It's yours for the having,
Yeah, no matter what the impact is on other people.
or the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of broadens the debate out rather large, doesn't it, Miriam? It looks like the whole lot of us are complicit in that one.
Yes.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you. Simon?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
I can, sorry, Miriam.
no, I'm
go.
done.
Oh,
No.
okay.
We went all over. There was so many access points for this. So there was national entitlement, and I spoke a bit about Britishness and the way that we move around the world, thinking that it can be anywhere at any time in that colonial way. And that sort of took us into a conversation about inner entitlement versus outer entitlement. The outer manifestation of an inner world that has that kind of feeling of entitlement and what that means you get up to. And then Dan brought in the notion of generational entitlement as well, and different levels of entitlement, not necessarily how we would expect it with the whole millennial debate. Actually, Dan, you can say more about this, but just the idea that actually there are some millennials who are sat with a lot of anxiety and resentment around the world. So it's not all about, it's all set up for me. Yeah, quite a few sort of polarities. And the other one that occurred was absolute versus relative entitlement, which could open up a whole nother can of worms.
What does that mean?
Well, so we can think that we're not entitled, but it's all relative. And are there absolutes? So a certain, like relative versus absolute income. So there's a certain level of entitlement. And that if somebody's got that, then they're entitled. Or is it all relative, actually? And again, it's about the inner world.
I want to just pop in a point of clarification. I built on what Andrea brought in around, she introduced the generational aspect of entitlement, and I built on it. And I'm just wondering if we got a quick glimpse at male entitlement just at this very moment, where what sticks is when the male talks.
Thank you. That's good learning.
Yeah, I think we all have our versions of that. Alistair, you get looking like a Cheshire cat. What went on in your head? Hit us with the blackmail version.
Well, since I'm in this community, I won't identify as a black man. I'll just identify as, what's that, specializing stage person on the levels of maturity. So I was raised in a system where everything was about education. So you get the best education, you get the best job. So I was even sharing in the group that hasn't been my experience. So there's this disconnect between the effort I put into my research, into my studying, then you get to the workplace and then it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So that's been a rough lesson in life. So I was in the group with Rikus and Pamela, and we were exploring the notion that no one's actually entitled to anything, from a philosophical point of view. Then we also explored human rights and commercial rights, in the example of, you can't evict a tenant unless you have given them alternative accommodation, because it's their human right. but then you are infringing on somebody else's commercial rights, rights of an investor who wants a dividend. So who gets to win there? And then obviously we explored the Ukraine situation, and it depends on which side of the fence you're sitting on, who has what rights in that whole thing. But at the end of the day, it's sort of like you can have rights in your own country, but it impacts other countries as well. So it all links into privilege as well, where that privilege comes from. And Pam said something quite profound. She was talking about Biko in saying that he was saying that back in the day, he was saying that the whole fight about rights is because somebody took them away from you. Then where did that really start? So when you're now in the new world where you were previously oppressed and you want to express that, then you look like the bad guy. However, you were put in that position by someone who just said, you know what, we need to survive and we need to get things done, so we're going to oppress you. So how do we,
that's my next question actually, is can victims be entitled?
Yeah, exactly. That was the point we were trying to explore before.
Can victims be entitled in a negative way or a positive way or a non-binary way?
Is there a distinction between being entitled and feeling entitled?
I don't know.
Thank you. I think it's a good question. I also wanted to ask that.
I don't know what the answer is for that. What answer do you think we should choose, or should we sit with both?
Julia, Charisse offered a definition into our group, which I thought was really interesting, that when believing that you are inherently deserving of special treatment or privilege, I get it because of ... which is quite an inner world thing as opposed to a...
Yeah, that's cool. Most of the research suggests that approach, that it's a being thing or a feeling thing. And then the disgruntledness comes when the world doesn't respond in the way you feel. I think one of the writers, I never know if I should mention this person's name or not, but they say whenever there's the word deserve, there's a problem with entitlement. So when you're coaching or you're working with people, then they say, I did da, 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 and then there's the word deserve, and therefore da, da, da. That's when you start, this world opens up. So it is a being in that sense. I was ba, 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 and then deserve. There's a particular sentence structure that goes with entitlement.
Or don't deserve.
Or don't deserve. I've been so nice to you. I don't deserve you to blah, blah, blah.
There's a quote, just to what you were asking about victims, Julia, there's a quote by Smuts, well, not a quote, but Smuts Ngonyama, who was one of the big freedom fighters in South Africa, once uttered these words that said, I did not join the struggle to be poor. And that line I've never forgotten, because I think it speaks maybe to what you're saying, like how do victims potentially become entitled, and now we have such a high level of corruption in the country, because if everyone's got that mindset of I did not join the struggle to be poor, what's the effect of that?
It's complex and tricky, and I applaud you for leading the conversation in that direction, because we have that type of, that is a lot of thinking in our country and globally. Now, I didn't actually become a politician to be poor. Would be another version of that. Who wants to follow up on that comment?
I'm going to follow up on that from two aspects. I think it's a pervasive thing in African leadership where freedom fighters will say, we went to war, so we have to, you know, have a big slice of the cake. Then also goes, the second part is about the whole debate around inequality. So if you're an entrepreneur, you say to yourself, I didn't take the risk to be earning as much as, you know, an employee. Then now you give yourself a big bonus and a big paycheck. And then that inequality gap keeps increasing. So there's this issue of entitlement from the political side and the business side from what I see.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I get in there and add to what Alistair said? Is that
cool?
Coming back to your initial question of can victims develop a sense of entitlement? In the just generally looking out and seeing what happens in the freedom fighter system and the like, you find that they developed entitlements based on what those who came before them had. And there was a total disconnect in that the societies that were in effect then were established to cater for a very small number of people who were supported by a broad mass of individuals. But now in this case, we've turned that upside down, and we're now making it available to a broad number of people, but we haven't changed the earning capacity of the economy. And so if there are any excesses that occur, they negatively affect the broader society, because it's now being done. It's almost like how here in SA we've got government employees. Every one of the senior government employees is a rand millionaire because they're being paid exorbitantly well. But the system is not engineered for us to be able to afford that. It could have afforded that in apartheid times because those senior managers were very few and not as many as they are now. And so the entitlement coming from, look, this is what the guys used to have in apartheid, so I also want it, then adversely affects us now. Instead of saying, guys, the things that worked for apartheid can't work for our system because we have an inherently different thing. We have different challenges that we're trying to resolve, and starting from there.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So I need some direction. We've had gender, we've had race, we've had continuum, we've had liberation, we've had context. Do you want to have just one slide up with just a few other things on, just as ideas, before we get into the conversation about actually coaching entitled people, including ourselves? I think we'll skip the conversation of being an entitled coach. No, it'll come up. Okay, so are you cool with that? I'll just bring a couple of other things up, if that's all right. And thank you for that, Mark. I'm not ending because your point died. I'm ending because I've got blocks of time in my mind. So I'm going to look for this now. And so I just want to show you this slide. We don't have to do it, but you know, it's been called the shadow side of deserving. And here are just some ideas about it. So, you know, I had a very interesting experience last week, and two of you were there, where I was the only white person for 3 days doing a lot of very intense work. And I brought with me all my kind of white ideas of things. And I would get irritated from time to time when people didn't think like me. And and why the system didn't work with me in the same way I wanted it to work. And so I thought about this idea of this entitlement, that the world actually has to think like me, that I'm right. And yeah, so here's some ideas. Not noticing privilege. The rules are not for me. I don't have to abide by the rules. The rules are for the minions to kind of do whatever. Then there's this sort of thing about, I did X, so I should get Y. What is very interesting in the literature is that entitlement seems to be matched by a lack of gratitude. So we sort of, entitled people tend, according to the literature, and I can hand it on, to focus on where they're not getting what they want rather than where they are getting what they want. This I loved, which is this idea that when people don't play by your rules, you can punish them, because you're entitled to have your worldview lived out in the world. And that made so much sense for, you know, how people operate in corporates. You know, there's a worldview and you need to play by it. And if you don't, we're going to punish you. Yeah, not understanding how meeting my needs affects others. And then this idea of my job should be organized around me. There's quite a lot of literature about the millennials, and the most useful and interesting one to me was that I think it's speaking largely of the American context, but because there's been a lot of praise, some millennials grow up not knowing where they're strong and where they're weak, because they haven't learned discrimination, because the feedback from the world has been universally positive. So the sense of identity and the sense of ego doesn't form as strongly, because they think they're good at everything, and that kind of blands out the formation of the ego. And so, in fact, this sense of entitlement is caused by a lack of a strong ego rather than too strong an ego. Does this make any sense? Very interesting idea. So I think I'm good at everything, which makes me not know where I'm good at all. And I don't know who I am. Instead of, I know I'm good at baseball, so I go there. And so I'm not entitled to the whole world. Just an idea. So I've zoomed through that. Does anyone want to make a comment? Because clearly I haven't covered everything.
I just wanted to, I mean, my question is around, because when I listen to us talking, also there is an element of, particularly around whether the victim is entitled. Where do policies, for example, end, and how that empowers me? Like, for example, I think someone mentioned the issue of eviction, that if you don't find a place for me, that's law and is protecting me as a victim. And to some extent, it gives me some power or leverage. Obviously, some of them are so open to abuse. Where does that also fit in? Because it does give some power to a victim to say the expectations according to the law are, and therefore you shall not just evict me, help me find a place, for example. I'm just posing a question because I think there are many of these policies that have been set up to protect the victims and the poor and the needy. And sometimes, obviously, people abuse them. But in some situations, they actually look quite legitimate because the expectation is such that you find me a place. I don't have a problem moving out of this establishment. Therefore, I'm entitled to decent living like you are. But I can't find a place I can't afford. So I just thought I'll throw in that, and because it also applies to other, laws that are set up to protect victims.
Oh, Kanisa, I think that's a tricky and complex problem you've posed us.
I know.
Do you want an answer today? Should we quickly solve it?
No, I'm just really posing it for us to ponder on these things, that it is, confirming the complexity of the whole thing.
Yeah.
That it just goes beyond. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's incredibly complex. I wanted to really focus on making quite a lot of the session very practical. Like, what do you do when you meet entitlement in a coaching session? And the reason why I really, really wanted to focus on this is a widespread disease in my eyes. And we have a chance to work on this disease from the inside. And we need to figure out, like in our sessions, we've spoken about working with race and gender in coaching conversations. How do we work with them? Because they're one-on-one, they're safer than group. So how do we introduce this idea of entitlement into coaching? And how do we work with it? There's also something about how do we diagnose entitlement? How do we see it? How do we tell that it's there? And I think there's some great clues that we can work on, and maybe we can kind of figure out a list. How do you know if someone has got more than their fair share of entitlement? What are some of the behaviors you can see? Simon, I saw you laughing there because I know you have some of these answers. Give it to us. What are the behaviors to look for?
No, I was just musing on the concept of fair share and who gets to define what fair share is.
I know. And I keep shutting off that door. I keep slamming it and it keeps getting open. So maybe, it's a very tricky one. So I suppose, now Rikus is also wanting to go to philosophy, I can see.
But short, quick. It's just my poor type 5 mind is trying to find some purchase in this quagmire of concepts.
Yeah.
And I think, so when you speak about entitlement, Julia, the sense that I get is you're talking about the difference between what you deserve, if I can say that for a moment, and what you think you deserve and what you really deserve. It becomes a problem when what you think you deserve is more than what you really deserve, or what other people think you deserve.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but it's not even that. It's just that you think you deserve everything you want, that you should get what you want.
Right. Okay. Because I also came to the session with that sense of, with that thinking about that's entitlement. But during this, I was looking at a dictionary, and I see there is the sense of entitlement in a legal sense. You're entitled to this. It's legally granted. So I think in an absolute sense, I don't think anybody is entitled to anything. I think we come here and stuff happens. So on top of that, there's some social, socially we grant other people some level of entitlement. And I think there must be some sort of agreement for that to be valid. And legally there's entitlements for which there must also be agreement to be valid. And I think then the sense of entitlement that you speak of, or in my mind, I think it becomes a problem or something that we can speak about in a coaching context when when those things don't match up, when there's a sense of
Yeah.
entitlement that doesn't match up to that that's socially or legally granted. That's
Yeah.
what I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Joe? Thank you, Rikus.
I'm just sitting here thinking about where does the concept of earning fit with entitlement. So when one's defense is automatically because I've earned it, whether you've earned it because you've earned your salary as a civil servant or because you've earned your position as a politician or as an activist or as a degreed person or as a parent, or so where that overlap is.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the same, but I think there's a conversation around at what stage are you entitled because you have earned and it's legitimate, and where does that get grey and murky because you think you're entitled because you earned, but in the broader societal context perhaps you actually haven't or are not where you think you may be.
Yeah, and you get there in ways that you don't notice.
Yes.
By gender, race, or participation somewhere. So those are the kind of broad concepts to hold. But what I was hoping for, and I'm just going to be pushy, is some of the behaviors you can see in coaching. So one of the ones that you can look for is that the client changes the appointment a lot and expects you to follow them. Does this make sense? Miriam, I see a big nod there. Yeah, Steph. So that often is a very good way to see entitlement, that somehow they can be chopping and changing with the appointment and you must follow because you are less important. You are not entitled to these strict slots.
Well, you might be, but their money in some ways, I'm not saying it's right, buys a level of entitlement which has become to some extent implicit in the coaching setup.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I think that's part of the deal. Who else has got some? Yeah,
Miriam. About 8 years ago, I was working with a private equity firm in the US, and the CEO felt that he was entitled to people's lives because he was paying them a lot of money. He was demanding certain things, and I was coaching 5 of his senior guys, and I actually left because I felt that those days I didn't feel that I was well equipped, because what I wanted to say to him was pretty horrible. And as a coach, that was not an appropriate thing. And I really stopped working with people like him that felt that they were so privileged that they could do anything they wanted.
Yeah, and Miriam, I love that you've been upfront about that. That's fantastic. So what was it? You just left. You left those people. You couldn't work with them. What skills could you have? I mean, so there was it an attitude thing or a skills thing? Or something else.
If it was today, I would never have taken them as a client to begin with.
Yeah.
So for me, it became an attitude that I felt that I just had no respect for him as a human being. And I didn't feel that I was well equipped to have that conversation in a powerful way. And so I stepped to the side, and pretty much I said to him that I did not want to coach him, but I felt that the only way I can continue working there is if he got a coach. And then we got into the conversation of that he didn't need a coach. He was making the money. And I said, well, that's really true, so that you really don't need a coach for the company. and I completed my work with his people and left. Like I said, I may not, if it was today, I may not take the client the way I agreed to years ago. Or if I would take something like that, I would have a very different conversation, and he would have, the person that I saw privileged like that would have to be coached. And it's a conversation that my daughter and I have a lot, because she works for a fintech startup who's privileged and who's entitled to what in terms of ownership.
Yeah.
It's a huge topic. Yeah.
Huge, huge, huge. And no one talks about it in coaching.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in fact, some coaches will collude with entitled people because it gets them more work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, saying no and walking away was not so easy, because for me, it was integrity for who I was, a human being, and the money I was making. And I said, not for myself. When I really looked at it pretty deep, it was, no, I'm not doing that. I don't care how much money I'm losing.
It's a tricky one because, you know, if you, I mean, this is very simplistic, but if the world is the goodies and the baddies, and you as a coach, who you're going to work with, where do you want your impact to be felt? Do you want it to be with the goodies that are in line with you, or do you want to like work with the baddies? And like everyone has their different perspective on this. It's just a decision you make. It's like, do I work with tobacco? Maybe I'll work with tobacco because maybe I can offer some value there to the world to change things. I don't know. It's a tricky one. Do we? Yeah. And it's just one of the multiple streams of conversation that we can have today. You know, how do we choose clients? I'm wondering, has anybody called someone on entitlement in a session?
I recall a time when you called someone out on a coaching session.
Me, Tim?
Yes, and and I remember it so clear in my mind. It was a white male who felt entitled to his views, and to a point was not even willing to engage on those views. And typical of you and your age, you stood up. Interestingly enough, you weren't even driving the session, but you were there. And I could sense that it was actually irritating you, because this had been happening for about 2 days straight. And on the third day, you just decided, you know what, I'm going to engage this guy, and I'm going to literally interact with him in the same level of entitlement that he thinks he's entitled to. And to some extent, as much as I thought when you were engaging him, he would not understand where you were coming from or even appreciate where you're coming from, when he saw that you were actually not backing down and you were actually calling him out on his entitlement, and there was a sense of understanding and even a backing down on his front. So that was my experience when it actually it happened.
Wow, Sam, thank you. Do you think it worked? Do you think it made sustainable change, or did I just irritate him?
It actually did. Well, I'm not sure about sustainable, but at least that week, he for lack of a better word, he checked his entitlement.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I have a feeling I remember that. Thank you for reminding me. I think sometimes being straightforward about it really works. And the tricky thing is to not shame someone too badly, Because if you shame them too badly, then it's going to come back. Miriam.
Julia,
Yeah, and Dan, yeah.
there's an underlying assumption here that entitlement is mostly negative. And I think I share it. I think I share that assumption.
Yeah.
And in the coaching context, what the question I'm sitting with is, if we sense that entitlement is coming up and we're intent upon drawing the client's attention to it, what is the hoped for outcome of that conversation? The larger question on that question is, as a thought experiment, if none of us felt entitled, and it wasn't just intellectual, but rather in our bones, had no notion of entitlement, how would the world be any different?
Well, we wouldn't get up and go. It's like narcissism, I think. We need a level of it to kind of impact the world.
Then what I'm getting from you is that it's a matter of degree.
My sense.
That's your sense. And so if someone is, shall we say, over entitled, what is it about their perspective that could be harmful or damaging to them and to others?
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm sitting with.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I see it in corporate, where outcomes need to match a person's expectations. People get used, resources get used without any idea of the impact on others and the world. And too many resources get used and people get shut down. You know, it's not material only, it's like intellectual ideas. And that limits our world and makes us less agile and makes it more difficult for us to find solutions for now. That's why I feel like it's so important, because, you know, if you have somebody standing up entitled in a group, say like in that instance from Sim, where you have one white man standing up entitled and sounding off. So he was entitled to this idea that his perspective on the world was right. So Black people's perspective on the world was wrong. And there were more kind of undertones which were less pleasant. And it could have just shut up a whole group of people that could contribute beautifully to the world. It can shut things down.
Thank you. Thank you. What I'm thanking you for is providing language that describes my feeling of it. I was having a hard time finding the language for it. You know, I think I had said there's an assumption that it's a net negative, and I think that's true. And yet I couldn't really find the vocabulary, the words to express it. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. What I'd love to, two people raising hands. Thank you. Oh, it's Rikus and Alistair. Yeah, hit it. Whichever one wants to go first.
I just think Miriam was before me.
Miriam, were you?
A real hand.
Oh, it was a real hand. Sorry, Miriam. I'm biased towards technology.
Thank you. Thank you, Rikus. Two things on that. I'm living in the woods in Montana this winter, and there are all kinds of animals. And I had a conversation with someone about how beautiful it was. And they said, oh, they're just disgusting. And I said, well, who are we to, I mean, they were here first. So it's like the entitlement of human beings to just destroy the animal kingdom, the animals, you know, so who are we as human beings to do that? And the other piece of it is, as a coach, I look at entitlement as a particular thing, but when I hear people speak, and I'm not coaching them, about their boss's entitlement and how their bosses behave, and they're afraid to leave their job because there isn't someplace, or they live in a small town and this is the only thing. And so we may not be coaching people, but we still hear of their quote unquote suffering because someone else is behaving in an entitled way. And as a humanitarian, I want to step in, but it's not my place. And I'm always sitting with that struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tricky one. And what it opens up for me is this idea that, you know, I'm entitled to not have my views argued with. I'm entitled to have a good life. I'm entitled to always be the victim. I'm entitled to always be the good one. As other versions of entitlement. So, and yeah, thank you for the animal story. Thank you. And now, Rikus and Alistair.
Just following on what Dan said and what you said on that, Julia. So what I got from that was the sense that entitlement is a problem when it's paired with power, which made me wonder, is it possible if it's a problem when it's not paired with power or with a distinct lack of power, sense of powerless? And I thought it could be in the sense that the problem there then with entitlement, if you don't have power, if you can't do anything about it, then it probably makes you feel sad and terrible if you feel there's lots of things that you should have or be able to do, but you can't.
Yeah. And I think also in that conversation, not to forget that victims are sometimes the most powerful people in our society. So, you know, power comes in many forms. So I don't know how you define that one. It's a very good opening branch of thought. Thank you for that. Alistair?
Julia, so I've never explored entitlement in a coaching session, and I'm just coming up with ideas now. So generally how I coach and enjoy coaching is coaching people who are different to me. And it's in the shock I get in those sessions about certain worldviews that makes me want to inquire more about that person's worldview. So, and I'm now just thinking in terms of like, how do you now, first of all, identify entitlement? And now how do you coach someone sort of to a better understanding of entitlement or getting rid of it? The idea I just got now is using that maturity framework. Because now, if I coach someone who's on my level of specializing, I'll be like, yeah, you put in the work, so you deserve the big paycheck, right? So I won't even see that entitlement because we're on the same level. But if I see somebody on a different level, lower or higher, I'm gonna get that shock of like, how could you put in all that work and expect, you know, a small paycheck? So is there like a model we can create of, on all those levels, how people view entitlement? Because at lower levels of like conforming, it's where gangsters are. They are entitled to your cell phone on the side of the world. They are entitled to, I don't know, gang rape, right? So for someone like me who's not on that level, I can easily get a shock in the session if I was to coach someone like that to say, wow, where do those rights come from? Tell me why you deserve that person's body or cell phone. So like, I've rambled, but to summarize, to say, are they on these levels? What does entitlement look like on all those maturity levels?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'd love you to do that. Thank you.
Julie,
it underscores the point of self-care, looking after your own maturity, supporting your own maturation so that you can offer insights that are useful. Did somebody want to talk before I had Chachambo and Sim?
Sorry, the hands are popping up. I think there's two things going on for me. One, in the coaching context of what's the impact of my race and my gender when working with a client with regards to entitlement. And yeah, like if it's a white male versus if it's a black male versus if it's a black woman versus if it's a white woman. And maybe linking it to Sim's story, would it have been as effective if someone of a different race stood up and made that comment to that particular guy? Or could it rather have been seen as, you know, Black people are always defensive and this is why I can't be free in the space? Or was it effective because you looked like him from a race perspective and maybe he was able to be like, okay. So that's one thing. And I've been in a situation where we were working with him. It wasn't calling entitlement, but it was straight out racism really. And it was an organization where everyone in leadership was white, everyone junior was Black. It was just difficult to understand how is this right? And there was a lot of fragility and a lot of feeling that, you know, as the coaches, we don't really understand because of our particular race. So that got me thinking about that. And then the second thing, I think linking to what Rick has said earlier around power, and also this idea of entitlement is given to you socially or legally, of, you know, when you don't have the power, are you actually entitled? And maybe linking to what Kanisa brought in around, therefore, where's the place for the policies that we have? And there's a lady I was coaching today who's very senior in her role. And in the particular organization she's in, she's built herself a 90% female team and Black female team. So colored woman, Black woman, and she's got one white male. But the entire session, she was really not apologetic, but really justifying it to say, you know, and it's not because they're women, it's not because they're of color, they really are the best people when I interviewed them. And this thing came up like 3-4 times until I said, you know, do you think the other managers who have white male teams are as apologetic as you are about the look of their teams? Are they justifying it in every meeting? Are they? No. And, you know, and she happens to be, she's a colored woman herself. And I thought, you know, even though you have the social seat, you may not have the entitlement. And therefore then, you know, without a policy to interrupt it, will it ever change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sort of linked to what you're saying, your first comment about it's easier for white people to call white people and Black people to call Black people. I suppose one of the big learnings in that in coaching is not to be caught in collusion. And collusion is when your coaching client, like say if I was colluding and somebody of my own race, then they might say something like, oh, those Black people in the team are blah, 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 blah. So that's an invitation to collusion. And Black people might do it too, like, oh, those white people, they're on a different blah, blah, blah. So we've got to watch for those comments so that we can stop them, so we can make sure that people know we're not going to collude in those ideas. Because that is part of entitlement, is to create this whole kind of wake of people that support it. Thank you. Thanks. Cool. Sim.
My input was just following up on what Alistair, I think it's Alistair, that was touching on the different levels of entitlement. And I think I want to link it back to the group I was part of in our session. When the discussion was unfolding, I was reflecting on the different levels of entitlement. Just as an example, I often find that also just linking it to policy, that by virtue of policy being created, there is a sense of entitlement that manifests itself, especially to different aspects within the business sector. A typical example of entitlement that we often encounter is emerging businesses, at least what we in South Africa call as your small, micro, medium enterprises, where there's a sense of entitlement for them to have access to opportunities, specifically on contracts, and a particular, in this context, a particular percentage of 30%. And whether or not they've got the skills, the adequate skills to work or even employ their services in that contract, there is a sense of entitlement that we as these SMMEs must get this 30%. So you often find in different levels, there is that entitlement. Of course, going further to different contracts from your different levels of within the business environment, in terms of your middle to as well as your well-off companies, even they themselves, there's a sense of entitlement that we should actually be getting opportunities accruing as a result of infrastructure that coming from the public sector. So you often find that there are those sequences that actually manifest themselves as a result of that.
Yeah, exactly. So what am I entitled to? If I've been wounded in the past, what am I entitled to now? How does that work? If I was a superhero and benefited in the past, what am I entitled to now? All really very, very useful questions for coaching. Steph, thank you for your comment. I'm just doing the second part of my commentary, and then I realize it'd be quicker to talk. And that is the thing about narcissism is the entitlement, and that the way out of getting caught in the wake of an entitled person is to really know what's important to you, as you say, growing in confidence. Steph, do you want to talk through that? You need a little bit of a mic off.
Yeah. Thanks, Julia. Yeah, I mean, I coach primarily in the private family space. So I work with individuals, couples, and family groups. And I've been, when this term entitlement, when you introduced it, and as the conversation has been evolving, that is where I think I've had to confront entitlement in, head on. Because in the couple coaching space, it has been, just quite overwhelming. So grounding myself in the moment, let alone being able to hold the space to call him, in this case, on his behavior and attitude, and holding the space enough for the wife in this case to stay present, because she was just, clocking out in the overwhelm of his barrage, which I had this was like 5-10 minutes into our first session. I mean, it was like, it was a steep learning curve for me. And in the end, because I did manage to call him on it, in the end, he marched out and said that I was biased. Maybe I was, but I wasn't going to let him take over the session in the way that he was definitely planning on. And he terminated the process, and the wife went on to get a divorce.
Yeah, interesting. And how delicate it is to call, because you got to really know what the risks are and know kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, so holding the space, and because you're holding the space for the people, but you actually need to hold yourself as well in that moment. So I think the more we can learn also in this case around trauma work for self and for other is incredibly helpful to being able to stay present in these situations. Because they seem to kind of left of center. I mean, like out of, they rarely seem to just be so blatant in your face. They come, yeah, off. Well, certainly in that case, I was caught off guard, but managed to center myself again. Yeah, we maintained an outcome in the end, but as I say, it was about enabling and empowering the wife in this case to stand up for what she wanted for herself. She'd managed to get to the point of drawing a line in the sand and saying enough is enough.
And, you know, a lot of the corporate interventions have got the same structure. You know, there's a boss who pays the bill, who's having trouble with this person. And often there's an entitlement amongst bosses that everyone must think like them. It just requires a lot of skill as a coach to be able to land stuff and hold the relationship. It's just impossible. I would like to check in with you. It's 5:30. I'd hoped for a bit of a breakaway group. Thank you, Steph, for that. That was an excellent case study for us. Like a breakaway group just to go and think through some ways to call people or to work with this in coaching. And then just to spend the last 10 minutes on Steve Biko and what he has to say. Or we can carry on chatting. What are you in the mood for?
Can I say something, Julia?
Yeah.
I operate in the non-profit sector. I work with groups of small enterprise, informal traders.
Cool, Steph.
And often these groups are supposedly to be empowered by the coaching that becomes part of the program. And I find myself in, you know, I'm just picking up that question you were saying, colluding. I find myself actually empowering people to call their entitlement, because most of the funding that these organizations receive is for empowering people who don't even know that they're entitled to certain things. And now, when they call out the organization and really calling what they're entitled to, then now they are perceived to be entitled. And then I think that is the confusing thing, that, you know, there are some contradictions in what some of the organizations say they are doing. And when people are feeling empowered enough, they call out to say, no, actually, we're entitled to this. We're entitled to be, you know, treated in this way. We're entitled to have this and have that. Calling the CEO, can we speak to the CEO? No, you can't speak to the middle manager. No, we want the top person. So that's where I am. And sometimes I'm not sure if, well, not that I'm not sure, because I pose questions, you know, and people take it up upon themselves to say, this is ours. You fundraised on our behalf. You got the money. We are the primary beneficiaries here. Therefore, we are entitled to this. Show us how you are empowering us. So there is also that element.
Yeah, it's complicated. And already when people say empower me, it makes me go bananas. Because you know exactly why, don't you? Because true empowerment comes from the person. They must empower themselves. It's not me empowering. But there's a lot of that sort of way of thinking. And thank you for reiterating the complexity of this. Like you can't just have one like simple rule that says this is entitlement. It's contextual, it relates to people, it relates to an inner world. And perhaps it's on this note that maybe we should go to Biko. And Carl is entitled to hear about Biko's views now. So I have this very bizarre thing about teaching, and that is that it's the Mr. Miyagi School of Education. And I don't know if you remember that movie Karate Kid, sorry. And so what Mr. Miyagi does to this young man is he says, wax on, wax off. Do you remember that bit? And he teaches him various moves that look like they're very practical, that they're related to building walls or cleaning cars. And he gets very good at those moves. And then Mr. Miyagi says, well, you've actually learned how to do karate, because if you do the wax on move in this context, you now know how to block. And this style of teaching works really well where people know the stuff already. Where people know the stuff already, and then all you have to do as a teacher is to collect it and put it in boxes. And then you say to people, well, okay, so now you know Biko. And that's why I've done this way of teaching here today, because you know this stuff already. You don't have to learn it from Biko, you know it. And so I'm going to just maybe talk a little bit about it and reiterate some other bits of Biko for people that might not know Biko so well. So I'm guessing everybody knows who Steve Biko was from the Eastern Cape, Gqeberha, depending what name you want to call it.
King Williamstown.
King Williamstown. And so how we have been working with Biko is this idea that Biko presented to us, the idea of inner freedom and outer freedom. And he was one of the primary thinkers of Black consciousness in this country. So there's a little bit of dispute about the role Bonnie Pitjana and other people played, but we'll just work with Biko. So this idea of inner freedom and outer freedom. So outer freedom is all the stuff that goes on outside. And so if you want outer freedom, then you must toy, you must march, you must picket, you must take on the government, and you must help yourself. So this idea of self-help, two very important parts of outer freedom. When it comes to the inner freedom thing, then that's when I think we see the biggest potency in Biko's work. So, you know, we all, or some of us know those Bob Marley quotes, none but yourself can free your mind, you know, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery, those sorts of ideas. So this, Biko was saying that even if you free yourself externally, you will still be a slave, because you have to free your inner world as well. And a lot of these ideas came, you know, from Fanon and from Jean-Paul Sartre and from Simone de Beauvoir. This idea that you're not born into a role or born into slavery, but you get socialized over time. And that, you know, Simone de Beauvoir, you're not born a woman, you get turned into a woman. Or in the Fanon style, you're not born a Black man, you get turned into a Black man by a context. And the process of turning you into a woman or a Black man or a Black person or a white person inevitably involves narrowing down your inner world. So essentializing you to very few parts. So in the example of Simone de Beauvoir, somehow now suddenly as a woman you can't ride a Harley Davidson and do other things that are stereotypically considered unfeminine. So your inner world is narrowed, and that narrows your behavior. And it narrows your sense of entitlement. Perhaps another word for that, if we're going to use that word, is it narrows what you think you deserve from the world. So coming back to Biko was saying that the way to build your inner world so that you had a more free outer world and inner world. So the way to do that is to take in parts of yourself that you have discarded. He was speaking of blackness, but I want you to work with a broader set of parameters. Take in those things, take in those identities that either the world has discarded or you have discarded or you have undermined, and bring them back in to expand your identity. So I'm no longer just a woman, I'm also a fixer of tractors or whatever, you know. The idea is to expand your identity, in particular, bits of yourself you might have left. And when you do expand all the identities inside you, you might expand what you think the world should be delivering to you. And perhaps you should be able to do this in a realistic way. I never know if I must talk about Swan Teal because she's such a controversial figure, but what she does do is she makes a difference. She discriminates between deserving and entitlement. And that's quite useful. And so in the Biko sense, it's like, who am I? What are the different parts of me? What does each part kind of deserve or is entitled to? And so that's one way to look at Biko's work. So really he's saying you can be entitled to quite a lot. But then the big thump in the face from Biko's work is his enormous focus on responsibility. And really, so Biko speaks about, he says, white man, black man, you're on your own. So it's not about saying white people are bad or useless or terrible white liberals. What he's saying is you are responsible for your own agency and for getting your life going, and you don't really deserve anything. You can't sit and do nothing. You've got to get up, help yourself, broaden your inner world, and go out and get what you want from the world, because the world ain't going to give you anything. You can be entitled, but you need to step up into that role. Chachambo, you the other Biko person on this call.
Well, my brain is, sorry, I'm sitting in load shedding here. I was actually going to ask you, Julia, if you could reflect on it for us from a superiority perspective.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is that thing as well. So white people will internalize a superior and more entitled position. Yeah. And black people will internalize. So there are all these dimensions of this. So thank you for bringing that one in. And black people will internalize a sense of, I can't really expect to get this or that.
And then would it be the opposite way for white people? So if you're working with a white client who's very, very entitled in the world, would it be about maybe minimizing the identities is the wrong way of putting it, but it's kind of letting them.
I wouldn't ever want to minimize identities, but what I would want to do is I would want to challenge what those identities think they deserve. Like one of the big things for me as a white person is this expectation that everyone will ever always understand me.
Yeah.
Now this is a big bloody joke.
Jeez.
So I think and my thing would be calling it and trying to keep it practical. And really, you know, part of that Biko thing is black man, you're on your own, but white man, you're on your own too. Do your own work. Don't expect black people to keep now trying to explain to you why you've been aggressive and entitled. Yeah, Nicola.
Chachamba, it's such an interesting question about entitlement. We just finished watching that Inventing Anna, which is such an interesting look at entitlement and how her entitlement swelled because she'd also reduced her identity, and her actual identity was shelved. So that moment in the last scene where the lawyer confronts her and says, you know, this is who you really are. It was almost like she had dissociated, she'd cut that off. So it's kind of increasing your identity to hold the paradox of what her entitlement, her getting out there and making it happen for herself allowed, and also being a poor girl from an outlying suburb in Moscow, and kind of balances itself out. Maybe that's the thing about increasing your identity to hold polarity, so it doesn't become cancerous.
Yeah, I like that. And being a little bit vigilant around it. Like, okay, so no one is going to understand me here. So I'm not going to turn that into another version of victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go, that's another part of my identity. I go to events where no one understands me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or I go to events where people think I'm an asshole. Because I'm not entitled to everyone thinking I'm great all the time. Okay. Any more comments on that?
Yeah, just one comment for Chachambo as an invitation. If you're dealing with someone with power and privilege, I was thinking of one of the slides Julia put up that people with entitlement sort of don't have any gratitude for what they have.
Yeah.
So I believe in not calling out people, but rather influencing or coaching them and saying, oh, so what are you grateful for? And then they'll probably mention, I don't know, just giving an example, I don't know, the beautiful scenery, right, of living, let's say in Cape Town where I am. Then just dig deeper and say, oh, so are you not grateful for that and this and that? And then make them realize where all that came from and some of the things they're taking for granted that they don't have gratitude for. So if you're open, please try that and see if you can get a breakthrough with that person, because you're sort of meeting them where they're at and forcing them to actually think and realize where all those privileges came from.
And how many we have?
Yeah, I can thank, oh, sorry, was someone else saying something? I thank you for Alistair for that, and I can hear it and I can hear gratitude. But I also think when it comes to working with entitlement, there's a big part of it that's very painful for entitled people or people in a position of superiority to work with. And I don't think gratitude necessarily gets you there. There's a part of a history, you know, that needs to, and maybe comes to polarity, you know, there's a part of a difficult history that needs to be worked with and accepted and kind of included in the picture. And I tend to find that's a very painful process for people, and it becomes very individual. Someone will say, it wasn't me, I wasn't there. when it happened, when, you know, it becomes very individual or it becomes very universal. That Robin DiAngelo writes about this and says, you know, then someone will lift the conversation to say, let's just all be humans. Let's not focus on race anymore. Let's not, but we have 300 years of a very racial, systematic system on this, in this country in particular. So I think that's where, and yeah, that's where it gets tricky for people. That's where I think maybe it helps if a white person can work with a white person, or it comes through when a white person speaks of it to a white person. I mean, I fully hear what Biko is saying from if you have less power and less entitlement, grow your identities, bring back what's left, to show up in the world and take what you deserve. But I think from a superiority perspective, some of what you need to go back and integrate is pretty painful, tough, difficult stuff that people don't want to face as their generational historical story. And so in that part of the identity, you know, if we never work with that, are we really going to work over superior? Are we going to get over superiority?
So what if the process is adding identities? So for example, I'm a nice person, but I benefited hugely from apartheid and I'm a racist.
Yes.
You know, that's a more balanced identity for me.
But that's really hard to get to.
But maybe we should be going there, because that is less problematic for people to have both, you know, the good and the bad. Obviously, it's a mature position. But instead of, because often like white people, and I've seen them at it, and I think I've been at it, it's like, don't take away all my goodness and just leave me with the identity of being a racist. So that strategy of bringing in new identities may be useful for both. I'm a racist and
a good person.
And I can be good too.
And I also did benefit from
apartheid hugely.
Apartheid,
and I still unconsciously talk over every black person that's
That's it. And you know, the first black person I've encountered is you in the workplace. The only other black person I know was a sister who cleans, and that's impacting my ability to work with you. You know, all that stuff.
Just add it on, don't take away. I love that. I think that's such a great methodology. I have to be on another call at 6.
Carl's been waiting. Sorry to butt in. Carl's had his hand.
Carl. Sorry,
Yeah.
Carl.
The white man in the corner of my screen.
Okay, we want to make sure you can be heard. Do it.
Still talking about how to call someone out on their entitlement, and also in a sense of a 5 saying, if you use the word entitlement, there's an institution or there's a legal system or there's some kind of system that you think you live in that gives you that sense of entitlement. So quite possibly by turning the camera away from the person directly, which might very much make them defensive or very quickly become personal, is ask them to describe what is the system that is giving you this sense of entitlement. And then out of that might come my suffering or my history or my religion, or often just the legal system itself, which does entitle people to certain things. And then by describing the system, you can begin to understand that person's entitlement. And by them seeing this often unconscious understanding of the system they're living in, that maybe it isn't particularly valid for all the contexts they think it is valid for.
I think that's a big wowza. It's a very, very useful thing. Aside, you know, that the way in Chachambo expanded identities and the way you're contextualizing entitlement, that's amazing. Very, very helpful. What is the system that gives you this? Any other comments? Very useful. Kanisa.
No, I'm just thinking about it from a cultural perspective, you know, that it would also be quite a great angle to come from, I think, from that system. And when we're working with our brothers and sisters as well. So I think it really gives us good context. Although I am a believer of calling things what they are. Because sometimes some of the people that I work with, you know, they get very stuck on being right about things. So I guess all of these things are contextual. If you see this one isn't working and then you switch on to the other one, but I think what Carl is saying is quite a powerful one that also doesn't get you into a position of I'm also right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And then you're not making someone wrong, which means you don't get a shame response, which means you can have a conversation. It's really great.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry about having to end on time. Pamela, have you come back for a goodbye or a comment? Nothing. Okay. I would love...
Sorry, just saying I've been here every second.
Yes, yes, I know. And I know, sorry, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm entitled to have your face looking at me. Sorry.
I put clothes on.
Thank God for that. That's swimming. So maybe just a 1 or 2 word checkout from everyone, just to kind of pop the session away so that we can dream about it. And Nadine and Micah, I think maybe you can have 1 word each.
Well, thank you for the session. You know, it's a difficult one because we can't talk about it. It really is a difficult one because it's that unspoken thing, and it makes it so open to manipulation. So that's my checker. Now it's your turn, Nadine.
Yes, thank you very much. I enjoyed everybody's input and everybody's chat. And yeah, it's like Micah says, it's a difficult subject, and I think we can go on for hours and hours about it and still not come to a conclusion. But yes, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Here again. Who's next up? Now, those 2 didn't follow rules at all. It was just like a quick checkout, but we'll let them get away with it because it's their first time round. Yeah, Joe, hit it.
My word is provoked.
Good. Yay. Is it yours too?
So is mine. Which stops short of triggered, I wanted to add.
Good. Provoked, not triggered. Fabulous. Next one.
Provocative.
Provocative. Good. Good. Cool. Next one.
Implicit agreements.
Okay. Implicit agreements. Cool.
It's about time.
About time.
Yeah.
Cool. About time.
Sensitized.
Sensitized.
Challenged.
Challenged.
Stretched.
Stretched. And in Chachambo?
Necessary.
Necessary. Who's next?
I'll go expanded.
Expanded. Alistair's curious. Mark, are you there? Are you load shedding?
I'm here. Profound.
Profound. Cool. Kate, are you somewhere in the Gauteng? Yeah. Okay, Carl. you want to have a word checkout? Are you cool?
I was sensitized.
Oh, you were sensitized. Oh, that's Rickers, sorry. I knew there was something going on in that one top left corner. Rickers, it's you.
I've used all my words. Thank you.
You've used all your words. I love that. And who is Andrea?
Lots to think about.
Lots.
Not a word, sorry.
That's cool. I think it was a really interesting session. I'm grateful. So thank you. And then we'll have a session next month. Come, bring your friends. Thank you, Mark. I hope we were welcoming enough for you and for Nadine and Micah. And we'll send the video recording out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Great.
Hi, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone. Lots of love.
Bye.